You're listening to The Dead Prussian, a podcast about war and warfare.
How does an army learn? How do the men and women currently serving in a modern army train to go to war? So often our view is retrospective, on the battles, campaigns, and wars as they happen or after the event. I have found myself with a unique opportunity to explore just how an army prepares itself, how it learns, and how it trains. I'm currently in the field on the Australian Army's capstone exercise, Hamel, and I happen to be working for the Director General of Training and Doctrine for the Australian Army, Brigadier Mick Ryan. Brigadier Ryan is an Australian Army officer, a graduate of Johns Hopkins University and the United States Marine Corps Staff College, as well as the School of Advanced Warfare. He's a passionate advocate of professional education and lifelong learning. Brigadier Ryan, welcome and thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks, Mick. As your script says here, this is the best show around. But seriously, I've listened to all of your podcasts, and I think it's tremendous that you're engaging more of our young officers in a professional discourse.
Thank you for the compliment, Brigadier Ryan. They're always welcome. You recently led a review into the education, training and doctrine of the Australian Army. Can you briefly describe the review and key findings for our listeners?
Well, thanks, Mick. I found myself in this job at very short notice at the start of the year, and with most jobs I really wanted to map out what I wanted to achieve in the job. So I pulled together a small team of people from around the Army to look at where we needed to go with training, with education, with doctrine in the Australian Army. After about 10 weeks, we were able to present a diagnosis and following that a campaign plan over the next few years that's looked at how do we reorient the training, education and doctrine system on the future, so that instead of continuing to train for things we know about now, we start to be more anticipatory in our training, education and doctrine system.
One of the central themes I drew out of the review was the need to further invest in the professional education and development of individuals as a foundation to build upon. Can you tell us how this theme is going to be addressed? In other words, how will the recommendations on professional education and development be implemented?
Well, our current approach really sees us marry up career management and residential training courses. And the development of our people is a more complex undertaking than that. It's a journey that everyone goes on in their professional career, and it's comprised of far more. And it's also clear in the diagnosis we did in the review that education and doctrine had a much lower value proposition with most people in the Army than, say, day-to-day operations and training courses. That's not to say that the Army doesn't value education, it does, but for much of the workforce it just didn't resonate to the same degree. So we're reinforcing a range of different initiatives around professional military education. Part of that is about the development of a strategy for our human capacity looking into the future. And then beneath that should fall things such as career management, talent management, personnel policy, training, education and doctrine. So specifically in professional education, we are reviewing the officer and soldier career continuum to include more elements such as self-study as unit PME activities to increase the access to educational resources. We're building an online PME resource that will take specific aspects of people's careers, whether they're junior leaders, mid-career officers and warrant officers, senior officers, and to provide them with things like reading lists, with quick decision exercises, with pre-course study, with videos and a range of other developmental resources that allow them to continue to enhance their professional mastery in what is, I think, the most difficult of professions.
What I find very interesting about that, Brigadier Ryan, is that new media seems to play a large part in that, and possibly podcasts are the way of the future, which is good for me. If I follow the logical path, which is actually a rare moment for myself, would I be correct in stating that the focus then turns to developing the team? And if so, can you provide some insight into how the Australian Army develops its teams through training and doctrine?
Well, great teams are built from great people who have good character, conform to our values, are well educated and trained, and believe in the common values and ethos that we all share. So there's a balance in developing the professional mastery of individuals and teams. On the individual side, this review is all about ensuring that there's an optimal balance in education and training for all our people. But that really is just the foundation to allow them to form teams, to cohere as an effective group of human beings that can go off into the most austere and difficult of circumstances and be successful. We use a training management framework in the Australian Army for our collective training, and that builds teams from section, or in the US instance, squads, through platoons, companies, combat teams, battle groups and brigades. And that's a journey that goes over a 3-year cycle of reset, readying and ready, where we build brigades so they can spend a year as the ready brigade, and they're prepared for any kind of mission that the Army requires, everything from humanitarian assistance through to high-level war fighting. And here on exercise Hamel, it's about evaluating the brigade that will next be the ready brigade to assure the Australian government, the Australian Army, and indeed the Australian people that brigade is ready for the missions that might be required of it.
And what we see here on exercise Hamel, as you've just alluded to, is an example of the certification stage of collective training before a formation, in this case a combat brigade, is ready for operational service. In your role as Director General Training and Doctrine, how do you design an activity such as this to achieve the training requirements of upwards of 5,000 soldiers?
Well, I think there's a couple of key elements right from the start in the design of the activity. The first part of the design is, what do we need to achieve here? And the answer there is a combat brigade that is capable of achieving a range of set tasks. The second element is, what kind of environment might that combat brigade be required to work in? So then we look at contemporary threats, different kind of environments around the world, and then we put them together in a design over several weeks. And we ensure that the brigade is able to undertake the range of activities that we've identified in the objectives against an adversary which is contemporary, is sophisticated, and provides a very high level of challenge to the brigade, but also the commanders in the brigade. A thinking enemy is a key element of how Hamel is done. And we normally use the ready brigade from the previous year as the enemy in Hamel. So it really is a peer-on-peer activity, and it's quite challenging for commanders at all levels.
Now, Brigadier Ryan is one of the show's most avid listeners and biggest fans. I'm sure you know that the final question is one that each guest is asked. They have to finish the sentence for me because I'm still learning how to finish sentences. So, Brigadier Ryan, can you please finish the sentence, war is?
War is in our nature. Unfortunately, it's a human thing that, as thousands of years of history show, it's just part of who we are as human beings. We constantly seek to improve ourselves, but we also seek to often have things that aren't ours. And that clash of wills, that is an essential part of human conflict, is something that has been part of who we are for thousands of years, and I think it will be part of who we are for some time to come.
That is a good answer, however, still short of 140 characters, so our Twitter army may have trouble discussing that one in one tweet each. But Brigadier Ryan, thank you very much for coming on the show and demonstrating to our listeners that the processes with which modern armies learn to go to war is something that is constantly evolving to the challenges of the complex environment they are expected to operate in.
Thanks, Mick. It's great to join you, and it is a podcast I listen to all the time. I would encourage as many of our young officers and NCOs to jump into listening to podcasts because it's a great niche for when you're doing a bit of PT or driving to work to listen to and continue to enhance your professional mastery.
Well, listeners, I hope you found this episode interesting. I'm working for Brigadier Ryan at the moment, and my career actually needs the boost, so please download this episode 2 or 3 times if you can. You can find more interviews on this topic on the Australian Army Training and Doctrine podcast, hosted by Captain Sharon Maskell-Dare. Be sure to download it from iTunes and SoundCloud. And whilst you're on iTunes, you may as well throw a few, let's say 5 or so, stars the Dead Prussians way as well. Until next time, listeners, grab a book and crack on.
Join the conversation with us on Twitter at Dead Prussian Pod, on Facebook at the Dead Prussian page, or on our website www.thedeadprussian.com. All show notes for this episode, as well as copyright information, can be found on the website. The Dead Prussian podcast is written, produced and hosted by Mick Cook. It is co-produced by Amanda Levito. The music used throughout is Caught in the Beat by Broke for Free and is used under a Creative Commons Attribution license. All opinions expressed by individuals on the podcast are those of the individual and not necessarily representative of any other organisation.